Now, amongst the guidelines laid down by the Supreme Court is avoiding terms like cripple and retard that perpetuate negative stereotypes and depict the diversity, success, and challenges of people with disability. Let me bring in Nipun Malhotra. He's the activist who saw a film last year and then decided that the matter now needs the intervention of the highest court of this land. Nipun is joining us on the broadcast. Nipun, what was the trigger? Why did you decide it was time to go to the Supreme Court?
The trigger that really made me take this petition to the Supreme Court regarding portrayal of persons with disabilities in visual media was this movie that Sony Entertainment Pictures came out with last year, titled Aankh Micholi. This movie had a very negative portrayal of people with disabilities, where disability itself was really lampooned. It had somebody who had a memory loss called Bulakkar Baap. Another person who was stammering was called Atkiu Keset. Night blindness was shown in a way which is not night blindness at all. It was totally misrepresented. And the basic crux of the movie was about how if a person with a disability wants to get married, they should really hide the disability. I'm a person with a disability myself. I have this disability called arthrogryposis. I'm a wheelchair user. And as a person with a disability myself, I felt extremely humiliated and hurt and offended seeing this movie. And that's why I decided to go to the Supreme Court so that such movies cannot come out in the future, because I think they reinforce stereotypes that already exist in society, unfortunately.
The guidelines that the Supreme Court has laid down today are being called landmark. Will you call them landmark as well? And do you think they will have any impact?
I think these guidelines are pretty landmark in that sense, because they've actually listed down how to portray people with disabilities. They've also mentioned some terms that are completely unacceptable to the society in general, things like crippled, spastic, etc., which are very archaic. And they've also made a differentiation between the medical model of disability, which focuses on disability as a condition itself, and a social model of disability, which really looks at barriers in society. But more important than that, I think what the Supreme Court has done very well is that they've differentiated between disability humor and disabling humor. During the first hearing itself, when my lawyers were arguing, I got a chance to speak as well. And what I had told the Supreme Court is that it is okay to make to crack jokes around situations persons with disabilities face. For example, there's a situation where I want to say go to a loo and I find a toilet which says that it's a disability toilet but has steps, and obviously it's not accessible for me. Laughing at that as a situation which a person with a disability faces, and a joke around that in a movie would be welcome. But laughing at the fact that I am a person with who's on a wheelchair, just laughing at the fact that somebody cannot see or hear is something which is really a problem. So I think the Supreme Court has made a clear distinction between situational comedy and comedy on the disability itself, which is unacceptable.
Over these years that we've seen Hindi films, we know that they get a lot of things wrong when it comes to people with disability. But can I ask you what the news media, people like us, get wrong?
I think one thing that a lot of news channels in India get wrong is really using the euphemisms around disability. For example, the UN recognized word is persons with disabilities, and persons with disabilities is what's legally accepted. But often we use softer terms like differently abled, specially abled, etc., which are nothing but euphemisms which are shifting the focus away from disability. The second thing that I think a lot of news media gets wrong is that they don't realize that there's a saying which, in fact, even the Supreme Court has quoted in its judgment: nothing about us without us. That, you need to have persons with disabilities in decision making, even in news media, even in editorial boards, etc., to really get an idea of what a lived experience of a person with a disability is. I'll just give you an example. For example, you're an editor of a channel. You will not have somebody who's a man hosting a show on gender and or woman issues in that sense. Just like that, having people with disabilities in decision making, not just in the media but everywhere, in film productions, in television shows, etc., and taking their inputs is something which would really help make the messaging much better in that sense.
What would also help is representation of disabled people in the political sphere. How many of our MPs and MLAs who come to the House, who we see every day on television, actually understand disability. My last question to you is, I'm not sure how many filmmakers out there will actually go out and read what the Supreme Court has said and the guidelines that the Supreme Court has issued. They'll have no choice to do it. But what is it? What are those few things that they need to know when they depict disability either in their films or their serials or their plays?
Yeah, a lot of people are going to start thinking, as you yourself said also, that is this a judgment that says that just that cracking jokes at disability itself is wrong, or should we just not cover disability in that sense because we might get stuck in a court case if we cover disability? That's not really the idea of this judgment or of my petition in that sense as well. What the judgment is trying to show is that treat people with disabilities as characters, and you can laugh at situations persons with disabilities experience on a day-to-day basis, but don't laugh at the disability itself. For example, if you look at the American film industry as well, right? There's been this huge evolution about the representation of blacks as well. There are still blacks in a lot of movies, even though there were a lot of cases in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in the US Supreme Court as well. Just like that, I'm not saying that disability should not be covered. In fact, I want more of disability covered. But just don't laugh at the disability itself and be a bit more creative in your thinking, and maybe run your script past a person with a disability before you're going to start shooting the movie. I don't think that's too difficult.
It isn't. Nipun, more power to you. Keep the good fight on. Thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now.